and welcome to the second season of the No Bullshit Property Podcast, brought to you by Cert Property. I'm Paul.
And I'm Howard.
And today we'll be talking to Angela Mansell from Mansell Building Solutions to continue our series on women in property.
Before we get started though, just a quick reminder to check out our previous episodes to give you an insight into our approach to transformative property management in the ever-growing build-to-rent sector and how we're building the sustainable communities of the future. So, before we get into questions for Angela, I suppose the hot topic to talk about in terms of market news is obviously the election and what's going to happen next with construction and both parties for the first time in my memory that I can remember putting housing right at the forefront of the election and electoral issues and a key battleground, and a lot of pledges being made. What happens next?
Well, that's the question. You tell me.
I'll tee myself up to answer my own question then, shall I? Yeah, I think the point of difference between the parties is obviously Labour setting housing targets. Conservatives obviously got rid of housing targets at a local level in 2022. Both parties talking a lot about, obviously the need for further delivery, but slightly different approaches. I think Labour are very much looking at taking a more helicopter view and removing local authorities' powers a bit more if there's local objections, more focus on Greenbelt. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that actually manifests into planning policy reform, which has been a big focus of Labour's talking. And I don't know what your thoughts on what happens next, depending on which party.
Well, I suppose the theory is depending on which party, isn't it? But I think the reality is it's probably a foregone conclusion what the kind of result is going to be on Friday. Yeah. I suppose it's the extent to which they gain the majority and what that looks like, really. Yeah. So if we are sort of going down the red route rather than the blue route, then to me you're looking at, housing targets are probably not a bad thing, but everyone's talking about the what, they're not talking about the who. So from where I'm sat, we can commit to building all these homes, but we can barely get up to, half those levels at the moment if we're lucky. And yes, there's all sorts of issue with planning policy and releasing land and, planning generally. That seems to bottleneck the industry. But even if we released a load of sites and we released a load of opportunities, we haven't got the people to build it. Yeah. So what no one is really thinking about is the who and the how are we going to deliver that. Which leads nicely into...
It does lead very nicely into it, yeah.
into my offering and how I can help.
I think a key thing for me, saying there, Labour obviously focused a lot on planning reform and talking a lot about it, and like you say, seems like a foregone conclusion in terms of who's going to win the election. But what those planning reforms are a key element that we see day in, day out, that's a challenge for us, for officers, for members as well, planning committee members, to even understand is viability as part of the planning process, and how difficult it is to make schemes viable at the moment, the world that we're in, high interest rates, construction cost inflation that we've had over the last few years. So that's a key focus that I don't know whether it will get any attention, whether that will be part of any planning reforms that Labour are talking about, but it's become one of the most key components of a process and probably one of the least understood ones. And that's a nice plug for our next podcast as well, by the way, because we're going to be talking about that on the next episode. But before we do that, obviously want to talk about Mansell and your journey as Chief Exec of Mansell Building Solutions. A great case of a woman in a leadership position in the construction industry. So, do you want to give us a bit of background as to kind of how it all came together?
A potted history. So I'm Angela Mansell. I'm MD of Mansell Building Solutions, and we are a second generation family owned and run business based in Manchester. My dad set the business up And, you know, I do tell this story, but my dad set the business up and he always said to me that construction was no place for women. And he wasn't being sexist when he said that. What he was really meaning was in the late 80s and early 90s, it wasn't a great place to work. It wasn't a very nice place to work. It wasn't diverse, you know, and building sites weren't really places women wanted to be. And he kind of maintained that stance. I toddled off to university. I've got a history degree from Manchester University. And I was never coming into construction. And I left uni and I went to work in the travel industry. So I worked for Air Tours for my sins. It was always a bit of a dodgy brand. I say for my sins, it was a dodgy brand at the time. But went to work in a sales and marketing role at Air Tours. And then the planes hit the Twin Towers. So in September 2001, I was working for them. I'd just taken out a massive mortgage, my first home with my husband. We'd just got married and I was re-interviewed for my job 3 times and my world kind of became really unsettled and really insecure. And at that point, my dad's business was beginning to grow. 10 years down the line, you know, construction was changing, and he turned around to me and he said, do you know what, I think there might be something you could come and do for me, you know. I'm seeing more girl QSs on site, they were his words. I'm seeing more girl QSs on site. I think it's getting a bit better. And he was, you know, our business is kind of a specialist, or is born out of a specialist finishing trades business, and he was engaged and worked a lot with Urban Splash. He converted a lot of the mills with Tom Bloxham and Simon Fenton partnership, and he put all the internal walls into the mills to make them into some of the first apartments in Manchester. And so he was like, come in and look after the buy-in. You know, I want to make sure that, you know, we're procuring right, and, you know, that'll be a good place for you to start. So that was January 2002, and here I am 22 years later. So I basically got involved in the business, started to shove my nose into everything that I could, always asking why, always trying to understand, you know, well, what do we do that for? Why do you do it like that? And kind of from that procurement role, I just kind of got involved in everything. And as the business grew, I grew personally with it. And then we kind of got to the point where we did do a management buyout. My sister was then involved at that point. We both had kind of a minor shareholding. And then things evolved to the point that in 2018, unfortunately, Dad passed away. And when Dad died, me and my sister Steph took the business on ourselves, full-time, 50-50 ownership. So actually just me in the business. There's another one of me. God help the world. We are very different. So yeah, me and Steph took on the business in 2018, and we've kind of pushed it in a slightly different direction than the sort of traditional on-site sort of finishing world. Feel like I've been handed a relay baton and I'm on my round and my part of the race, and I'm looking to do something slightly different, because as far as I can see, construction does need pushing, it does need challenging, it does need to kind of look at what it's doing and how it's doing it, and there's a better way to do things, I think.
Did you think you'd still be there when you started in 2002?
No, I didn't really, because I think part of that is a generational thing. I thought my dad was going to last forever.
Yeah, but did you think, right, this is a career for me? Or
no, I didn't think it was a career. I think it was a job. I think I thought it was like a stepping stone. It was like, oh, I'll see how this goes. I'll sort of see where it takes me. But no, I didn't see it as a forever thing. And now I can't imagine anything different. I can't imagine not being in construction. I don't really know what else I'd do.
And what's the workforce like now in terms of male-female split?
In terms of, we employ 55 people. I'm not entirely sure on percentages. You know, we have a fairly good representation. You know, everyone talks in our world of gender, but we've just started on our EDI journey, because actually it's about far more. You know, about businesses need to be diverse, because it's just important that you've got different ideas and different thought processes and different experiences around a table. So, you know, me and Steph own the business, you know, in terms of diversity from a women's point of view, you know, we're up there, aren't we? But again, you know, it's the whole piece around age. We've got an ageing workforce. I need to look at, and construction's got an ageing workforce, so we need to look at that kind of whole kind of age diversity piece. There's the gender diversity piece. You know, then we get into sort of religious and ethnic diversity. You know, we've have employed a BD manager, a guy called Ibby, in the last 12 months, and I've just sat in a meeting with him talking with an engineering practice, and everyone focuses on women, but he put his hands up and he's like, you don't see many brown faces in construction. And he's like, I'm conscious of it, and it is beginning to emerge, but there's that kind of piece of the jigsaw to fit in. I was talking to you before we started. My kids have been recently diagnosed with ADHD. Neurodiversity, therefore, is another piece. That's the other piece of the kind of diversity jigsaw. So I think we've got to consider all of these things and maybe not get too hung up on gender. I think difference is brilliant, and having difference round a table is really what is going to make your business move.
In the world we live in now, where there's so much information at everybody's fingertips and everything evolves so quickly, it's mad really that you wouldn't have all that around the table, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So construction needing to do things differently, it's something that we've talked about a lot as a business, also on some of our previous podcasts with different guests. And I'm very firmly of the opinion that construction is one of those industries where it's done a certain way because it's been done a certain way for a very long time, and there's a huge resistance to change because it's a traditional industry, and obviously there's more layers to it than that, and there's constraints of building regulations and all the various different layers that go with that. But how do you see things in terms of they need to be done differently? What's your approach to kind of contribute to that?
So I think a starting point for when I sort of have taken the reins over in our business, the pandemic kind of 2018, and then the pandemic kind of got in the way. But one of the things, part of our vision is all about challenging the norms. It's about pushing the boundaries to question and understand why we've always done things a certain way. I do think that construction is fairly institutionalised. I think REBA and RICS have a massive handle on what goes on in the industry, and I think they resist change. I think there's this notion that if we start to do things differently, that somebody somewhere in the chain is going to lose out. And I think that's where some of the resistance comes from. If we get into systemised builds, which is what we're all about, then that's going to mean that there's going to be less design input and less engineering input and less commercial input. So therefore, surveyors and architects are all under threat. Mm-hmm. The bit that people are missing is I started off before, didn't I, by saying we're challenged by who's going to do all this work. So we haven't got enough resource. Yeah. So what we need to think about is redeploying the resource that we've got and using it in a different way. Mm-hmm. And so for me, it needn't be, this is all about change and change management. This isn't about fearing people are going to lose jobs and lose opportunities, because they're not. But what we need to do is think about what we're doing and how people are kind of used, but in a much different way. So one of the first things I've started to do is actually talk to the chain of property and construction. So you and I had a conversation earlier on this year. I see us down at the bottom of the food chain, because it is a food chain in construction. We're the specialist MMC contractor. Ordinarily, I don't think you and I would have a conversation. Mm-hmm. And therein lies part of the problem. Mm-hmm. And I'm pushing the boundaries around those relationships, because actually, if you look at where Building Safety Act is going to take us anyway, we're all going to have to sit around a table much earlier on and work out what we're going to do. And I do see that as positive. Mm-hmm. Because I think what we're too focused on in construction is cost. We're not focused on value. And so I've started off by engaging with people in the supply chain, clients, consultants, local councils. Salford City Council are never going to buy anything off me, but they should care about what I'm doing and how I'm doing it, because it impacts upon the communities in which we're building. If I'm doing the building, I'm going to be able to work with some of the people that they're kind of trying to give opportunities to. So I'm out there pushing those boundaries around who speaks to who and who have you got relationships with. And then off the back of that, we've got to look at the way in which we're building. So the way in which we're building, what construction doesn't seem to do is value time. We value a cost in terms of the materials and the resources. It's going to cost me that to a building. But very few people are massively engaged in, but how long is it going to take me to build the building? How can it be productive? How can it be efficient? How can I open that building quicker? And then by default, if you value time in that way, the overarching cost and value of that building will be cheaper. So I think for me, it's trying to push people to go, build the thing quicker, to build it quicker, get a team sat round a table, design it in a systemised way, build some of it in a factory, then assemble it on site and work together to do that quicker. And fundamentally, I think if we start to value time and we start to understand that, that's how you're going to eke more out of an industry. Because as you said before, we're faced with challenges of rising costs of materials and resources. You know, resources are, people think our industry is about the building and about the project, and it isn't. It's about the people. It's about the people and the teams of people who build the buildings. It's then about the people that live in the buildings. So this is all about people. National minimum wage, real living wage, you know, those base costs are going up exponentially. You know, we saw like an 11.8% increase on the real living wage this year. You know, that's putting pressure on cost. But if you can pull some of that back by building something quicker, you start to negate some of those kind of issues. And equally, you look at where interest rates are at and you look at how finance is working, you've then got the double-edged sword of if you can build something quicker, it's going to cost you less on your borrowing as well. Yeah. But trying to get people to appraise a site in those terms can be a challenge because people are often scared of, can we really build it quicker? How much fat do we build into a programme? And let's just protect our position. So that's kind of where I'm coming at it from.
Sure, no, it's challenging to change a mindset that's, like you say, so institutionalised and ingrained. So you mentioned there you're a specialist M&C contractor. Yeah. So what's your modern method of construction, I guess? So
we are using what the world is beginning to understand. We're using a category 2 panel. So it's a 2D panel and it's made out of light gauge steel. So we're panelising it and we deliver panels to site and then we erect them on site to turn them into 3D structures. So part of it's done in a factory and part of it, the actual structure, is created out on site. There's a lot of interchangeable terminology, I think, in this space. Modular, volumetric, MMC. What do we really mean? And I think people use all of those terms like interconnectedly, but they're not. So we don't build boxes in a factory. Yeah. I don't think we're ready for boxes in a factory, and I don't think we will be anytime soon, because I don't think we can get ourselves organised enough to do that. I also think that by the very nature of the beast, a panel is easier to construct in a factory and move it on. What we're trying to do is apply factory processes to the systemisation of a build. Site's free, so you should still be using site as a place to install and erect some of this stuff. Factories are really expensive to run. If you've got a super factory out in the middle of North Yorkshire, I'm not mentioning any names, but you know, to fuel and power and resource these factories, it's much more expensive than a site, which is why off-site construction in those forms are so much more kind of expensive, especially when we're not valuing time because we're not viewing putting things on site and having them ready to go. So we are a category 2 panelised system using light gauge steel. We can go up to 14 stories, but our sweet spot is probably around 2 to 7 stories. Maybe 8 stories at a push. Anything in the realms of 6, 7, 8, people start to look at concrete or hot rolled steel. So we've got a real sweet spot, because if you had a 6-storey building now, you can't build it in timber because of fire regs. The only way really at the moment you could build it, it's not efficient to do it in concrete or hot rolled steel, so then you're reverting back to traditional methods. Mm-hmm. So there's a real opportunity for us in that space, and that's where we're gaining real traction. And then we gain traction by, my kind of focus has been, find the early adopters, find the people who are having major problems with what they're doing and offer them an alternative solution. And if they are big enough thinkers, they'll come on the journey with you. And I've started off in the main contractor space because fundamentally contractors are still our clients. About 80% of what we do is with the main contractor, about 20% would be direct for a developer where they may be self-delivering. And, you know, it's hearts and minds, you know, when I get to the top, I'm looking for the MD, I'm looking for the sort of creative thinkers for them to go, that's a good idea, we're going to try it. And then we work with them. We genuinely want to be helpful in construction projects. And we work with them to hold the hands through that change, to show them what's possible. And in doing that, when you've done one scheme with people, they realise the art of what's possible. And then before you know it, you're spinning off and you've got 2, 3, 4, 5 schemes off the back of it. So that's kind of our approach, is to win hearts and minds, prove it on site, and then move it through.
So I read something, an interview you did recently, Angela, and it said you didn't want to be a disruptor in the industry.
Yeah.
So what did you mean by that?
Well, to me, you've got to work with an industry. There's no point trying to work against it. And in an industry like we've got, you know,
It's almost impossible.
it is, and it's fairly pale, male and stale, I am going to say it. So it's like you're almost kind of, you'll just be pushing against something that's impossible. So work with it, don't work against it. So I suppose I'm sort of like, I see myself more as a change maker, an agent of change, than a disruptor. And I think it's got a slightly different kind of connotation. But I want to work with people. I don't want to work with everyone. If you don't get it right now, if you don't get what I'm talking about, that's fine. At some point, you'll catch us up. And when you're ready, give me a ring. But I want to work with the people who get it, want to try it, want to understand it, and move things forward.
I thought it was quite interesting because we talk so much about disruptors in the industry, and it's almost like a buzzword, isn't it? So it was quite interesting when you put it like that.
Yeah.
But it goes back to
Yeah.
what I was saying before, that the industry specifically is constrained, and you know, we've talked on this podcast and explored also as a business various different modern methods of construction to, you know, try and combat the challenges we're facing in terms of higher cost of labour, higher cost of materials, etc., higher cost of interest rates. And we've come across some weird and wonderful ideas, some great ideas, you know, from recycled materials being used as building materials to, like you were saying, completely off-site fabrication of, you know, whole apartment pods. But the constraints of the industry mean that you can't, you know, overreach and disrupt in the sort of sense of, you know, some other industries, because you've got your fire regulations, you've got your building regulations. Beyond that, you've got then, even if you're, you know, ticking those boxes, you've got the challenge of warranty providers. Is a warranty provider going to give you a warranty for your, you know, fantastic revolutionary disruption idea? Even if they are, is a mortgage lender then going to lend against that property as well? So you've got so many blockages in this industry in terms of the regulation. And obviously the regulation's there for a reason. We don't want unsafe buildings. We want things to be constructed to a satisfactory standard for people to be able to live in. But to be able to truly disrupt, it makes it a lot more challenging.
Absolutely. And so then you have to work within the constraints of what you've got, don't you? Yeah. And for me, you know, MMC is a really interesting term, because, you know, modern methods of construction, you know, I'm just going to kind of nail the myth now. There is nothing modern about anything that we're doing. You know, the materials that we're using, we've been using for 35, 40 years in buildings around Manchester. Light gauge steel is SFS. You use it to infill taller buildings that are concrete or hot rolled steel. So this material, and then the sheathing boards and the insulants, and then the internal gypsum plasterboards, none of it's modern. So in a way, you're almost working with what you've already got. Yeah. So in terms of that change piece, it's like, right, don't be scared, because you've been doing this for donkey's years. The bit that's changing is the middle M. It's the methodology. It's the methods. Focus on the methods, because methodology is where you'll get that productivity and efficiency drive. Yeah. That's the piece we should be focusing on. Yeah. And eventually we might evolve that and might spin that for it to, you know, eventually we will get more on a panel in our factory. Eventually these things will kind of evolve, and some people are in our space doing that now, and it's horses for courses. I think we have to recognise in the UK as well is that, you know, we're an island nation, and, you know, we've got the plains of Cheshire right up to the Highlands of Scotland. If you look at our geography, our topography, the sites that we're faced with, you know, we're not America, we're not Australia. You can't just, you know, do a Henry T. Ford model of, here's 6 house types, whack them on a piece of land, job's done. We don't have that luxury, do we? So you've got to be able to kind of flex with what you're presented with. So I'm not here saying everybody needs to build the way I build on everything they do. But if you take that 300,000 homes target that the Labour government will set, I'm saying you need to build a portion of those differently to take the pressure off the resource base. So in terms of some of the stuff you guys will have been looking at, you know, I'd be looking at your pipeline with you going, really honestly, those 3 jobs are not going to work, but those 2 might, let's explore them. And I think it's that kind of slow change, it's not too frightening, it's not kind of too massive. People can manage it in bite-sized chunks.
Have you ever looked at the UK versus kind of continental Europe? Because obviously there is a lot more MMC type forms of construction. Where do you think we sit compared to?
To be fair, I haven't really, and I haven't really because their housing models are so different. So their pipeline, my perception would be, is so different. You know, I'm just thinking about the time I spent in Germany on the German exchange at school, because we all did a foreign exchange, didn't we? And, you know, the family I stayed with, they lived in a flat, they lived in an apartment, which back in the early 90s, you were like, this is a bit strange, where's all the houses? So I think some of the housing models are different, and because they're different, they probably feed a pipeline, because one of our biggest challenges, and so therefore you're able to progress quicker and develop and kind of speed up the parameters of what's possible. One of our challenges is our factory's sat in Bolton. We can deliver 1,000 homes a year out of our facility at the moment, but we don't deliver 1,000 homes a year because I can't secure the pipeline far enough in advance to ensure that 1,000 homes are constantly coming out of it. And I think because planning and because it's so disparate, because we haven't actually, everything is project by project in the way that we work. You probably haven't even really got a pipeline. You've got a pipeline of sites, I suspect, but you haven't necessarily got concrete kind of work to talk to people about. And therein lies part of the problem, because you need to feed a factory system. Even if you're systemising a build, there's got to be volume coming through. Yeah. And I think that's probably one of the differences. I suspect on the continent, they've nailed that pipeline a bit more, so they've been able to advance a bit.
Yeah, no, and I think that goes back to what you were saying before about, you know, the off-site models where you've got these huge factories and you need that volume to keep coming through, and hence we've seen a few administrations in the industry for different types of MMC. So yeah, it's interesting to hear your model of it. Obviously you're still factory based, but obviously a lot less reliance then on this continual throughput of.
Absolutely. So part of our premise is that we're looking to multi-skill the people that we employ. So first and foremost, we're focused on direct employment. We've got a factory, and in panelising the frames, we directly employ those people on the shop floor. If we've got a pipeline going through that we are then going to finish it on site, and we are contracted for that whole solution, what we then do is we train people to erect the frames, to then finish the internals on the frames, to finish cladding on the frames if we're going down kind of like a cladding type system. So we're looking to directly employ a multi-skilled workforce, because one of our USPs is that we want to see the building through. We can offer as much scope as a client or a contractor is prepared to give us. And in doing that, we can secure sort of direct employment for multi-skilled operatives. So our model, the moment, the construction model, everybody's using subcontract labour. We're all dipping in the same pond, and the pond's getting smaller. And so ultimately it's the labour that's calling the sort of shots on the rates, which is then what's forcing rates up. I'm looking to kind of directly employ and have more control over that resource, because I think part of what we're selling is certainty of time, certainty of actual delivery. So directly employing people is kind of part of that jigsaw.
And how's that going? Because you know, common theme in this podcast with different guests we've talked to, whether it's consultants, whether it's engineers, whether it's contractor, whether it's local authority planning department, whatever the sort of subsector of the property industry is, it seems to be a consistent theme of it's a challenge to get people into the industry, and touched on it at the very outset. The diminishing pool, the smaller pool of resources. How are you attracting people into the roles and into the industry?
So after Dad died in 2018, one of the things that Steph and I really kind of really decided was important to us and to focus on was all the kind of the piece around our business and its culture. Like, what do we stand for as a business? Why do people come to work? Why do they want to be there? How can we support people? How can we make it a place where people want to be? And I think focusing on the kind of cultural piece for us as a business, for our staff and for our people, and then pushing that message outwards towards our customers and aligning with people who are like us. I think what then that starts to do is it helps you retain the talent you've got, and then it helps you attract people into the business. So we've consciously had a focus on trying to make Mansell a great place to work. And then in creating these opportunities that are direct employment, that are, you come in and join us and we will train you in a process as to how to do some of this stuff. But then your career path is, when you get really good at that, if you want to start managing people, we'll set up a small team around you and you can pass on your knowledge to them and you can train them up. And then when you've got really good at that and you want to move on, then one of your options would be, we'll look at site and look at running a site and a team of people to then get a building erected. And I think what we're trying to do is give real sort of sustainable career paths to people, because I still think people out there fundamentally, I know in terms of age and generations, people don't want jobs for life anymore. But people want stability and they want some certainty around knowing that they've got a job and they can pay the bills. And actually, it's a good place to be, and they get something out of it. They find sort of a bit more of a purpose. Mm-hmm. So I think it's kind of focusing on that, I think, is important.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I actually think that what you said there, people want stability, but do people not want jobs for life? I think part of it is just, the grass is often greener and people move on. But if you're empowering people and giving them that opportunity within your business, then why can't you see someone rise from, an entry-level job as a teenager through to, senior management?
Well, and to be fair, that is one of the stories. One of our directors, he is a plasterer by trade. He's come off the tools and, he has been loyal and has been he was working with my dad and now he's working with us, but that's exactly his story. So, it is possible.
Yeah. But I think part of the problem is it's not mapped out, and that what you're saying there is you're mapping it out to people right from the beginning. I think it is difficult for younger people that it's not necessarily mapped out. So if you think of construction, you might think of just working on a site, not where you're going to go from that. Because, people aren't educated in having jobs for life anymore, are they? And that goes back to school and goes back to careers advice, not like when we were younger and this was your path and you chose these options to do these jobs. And it isn't like that now, is it?
No. And again, kind of as a specialist contractor, we're involved in more facets of what we do. So the opportunities to our staff begin to kind of open up. So, we're employing in-house designers, we're employing pre-con, we're employing business development. It isn't just all about the site. So there's absolutely apparently there's something like 167 different careers and jobs within property and construction. We don't talk enough about it to younger people, but I'm trying to kind of create that scope so people can see where the opportunities are.
Yeah, absolutely agree.
Yeah. So what's next for Mansell?
Fill in the factory. That has to be kind of a focus. Finding, great clients to work with, people who align with kind of our way of thinking, our way of doing things. So filling one factory would be brilliant. And what I'm really trying to create is a blueprint for what's possible. One factory doing 1,000 homes and we're trying to build 300,000. If I'm talking about 10 or 20% of that needs to be done differently, well, to me, I think this is all about building locally. In medieval times, people would source the product, the products and the people to build the homes locally. I think that's what we should be doing. So we're sort of sat up in the top quadrant of Greater Manchester. When you look at the aspirations of what, I think we have great sort of civic leadership in our city region. And when you look at the aspirations of what they're trying to do, we really probably potentially could have a factory in each borough. If you want me to talk about sort of bigger aspirations, there should be enough pipeline coming through that why haven't we got a factory in each borough producing 1,000 or so homes and starting to deliver against what's needed. And then if you can do that in Manchester, what's possible in Birmingham and what's possible in Bristol and what's possible in London. So yeah, blue sky thinking. That's kind of where I see it.
Yeah, very good.
What about the future for the business? Will your children go into it and take it over?
Interesting one. I mean, it wasn't an obvious thing for me to do. I was actively discouraged. Do you know what I think is really important is I don't want to force them down the route. They're not showing any signs that this is the industry for them. But I wouldn't preclude it. I would support them if they wanted to. But I think they've got kind of different things on their minds. And my son's literally just looking around unis now. He's looking at kind of psychology-based stuff. And then my daughter doesn't want to stay and do her A-levels. She wants to get out in the big wide world and she's interested in marketing, social media and all of that.
That could be part of what you do.
It could be. But again, she's rather like me, so I'm not sure how well that'd work.
It's very inspiring, your journey and just all the knowledge and everything that you have. I've learned a lot.
And I think it's an interesting one as well in terms of family businesses, because they seem to be less and less in terms of where, there's the succession from generation to generation. What do you think? I mean, obviously you've come through as a second generation. Is it a good thing or a bad thing that there's fewer sort of now this generation wanting to go into a family business?
It's probably not a great thing, but again, I mean, don't even set me off on the education system, because I think that is a whole different kind of animal. But I think again, there are some real big things that these successive governments need to address. And I think one of the challenges is we've got an education system that isn't fit for purpose. It wants to sort of churn out sausages out of a sausage factory, and we're all individual human beings. And, I just don't think it aligns to, because probably in days gone by, people got involved in family businesses much younger. Earlier on, and our systems don't necessarily allow that anymore. I mean, I'm not advocating child labour or anything, but kind of where I'm going with that. But then I also think we are broadening kids' minds, aren't we? I think we did used to live in sort of, in different times where that was all they could see. Your dad was a brickie, so you were a brickie. Your granddad had a construction business, and that was just naturally, did you want to be on site or did you want to, be in the office or whatever. And I think kids' minds are hugely expanded. And as parents, my job, I think, is to teach my kids how to be independent, and how they're going to get there then is up to them. But I think to do that, you've got to let them make their own mistakes, go down their own paths, realise they took the wrong branch and come back. I think I don't think it's as clear cut anymore, is it?
And then there's obviously no right or wrong in terms of whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. I guess it depends on the business, the family, like you say, what the children's aspirations are. But again, I think probably because property is still quite traditional and construction, you still see quite a few firms where there is that transition to the next generation. And be interesting to see how many more of those do come along and survive and prosper.
You never know, it might be my daughter. God help the world if it is.
Good. Well, thank you for joining us today. It's been a really interesting chat. So thank you for your time.
No problem. Thanks for having me. Nice to see you.
Yeah, hopefully can make a dent in that 300,000 target of housing.
I'll give it a
go. Great stuff. Thank you.
So if you enjoyed today's podcast, please hit the like button, hit subscribe, and you can find all the latest investment information, management information on certproperty.co.uk.